Hello, my dear readers. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's time for another one of my short stories. This is the companion audio series for my blogger stories series over on my website, authorncwest.wordpress.com. Over the following weeks, I will upload the audiobooks of the other short stories in this series. Appointment to Die, a short story, written by Anne-C. West. Narrated by Anne-C. West. My name is Susan. This is the story of my death. I am 93 years old, healthy, active, and love life. A widow for the past 30 years, I've lived alone, buried my children and most of my friends. I love God and I marvel at His blessings. He's allowed me to live a life full of adventure and has been with me through changes in this world. Today, I decided the time has come for me to die, and I would love to share my journey with you. Pour yourself a cup of tea and share in this last chapter of mine. This is my plan. Good morning, Mrs. Devonish. I have an appointment with the pastor. There I stood in front of the door of our beloved Pastor Frank. I had this habit of always fixing my hair while waiting to meet people. I've worn it in a bun since I was a little girl. This way it kept hair out of my face when I cook and bake. Good morning, Mrs. Baxter. So good to see you. He's waiting for you. Please come in. Isabel was Pastor Frank's wife. She was such a darling young woman and a true pastoral mother. I walked through the open doorway and followed her through the house to Pastor's study. Every lost soul received a bite to eat or a handkerchief for tears in her company. Many people in our small town called her friend. Her dotted dress swayed ahead of me in the dark passage, the only thing I had to guide the way. I wondered if she's as comfortable with the sewing machine as she is mothering the congregation's flock. Mrs. Baxter, how nice to see you. Pastor Frank stood before me and gave me a little handshake. Isabel drew the curtains back, opened the window, and the fresh air blew all the previous conversations and thoughts out the window. How are you, Mrs. Baxter? Pastor Frank said and smiled. Very well, Pastor, very well. I have more than enough to be thankful for. His friendly manner made me look forward to having this heavy discussion. Thank you for meeting at such short notice. I chose a chair close to the window and sat. I need to finalize this decision. A knowing glance exchanged between Pastor and Isabel. Isabel pulled the door closed when she left. It sounds serious. Pastor Frank took his place on the chair opposite me. What can I do for you, Mrs. Baxter? He folded his hands and rested his elbows on the armrests. Pastor, is wanting to die a sin? This was the first question on my list. Not that I had one. I memorized every question and played them over and over in my head. No, Mrs. Baxter, we all reach the time when our lives are over, and nobody knows when it will happen. That's why it's important. My business with God is in order. It has been my whole life. But I think it's time to die now. Pastor Frank's hands swung loose from their entanglement with each other, and his back straightened. To take one's own life is never the way to solve any problem. Can I help solve your problem? I am sure we can find a solution. He switched to his counseling voice. Sympathy sat thickly on his words. No, Pastor, I'm not speaking about suicide. I want to know, is it possible to stop living, give up my life, and blow out my last breath on my own terms? I looked at Pastor Frank. He was young. How will he know anyway? One could understand why our congregation loved him. He was such an honest, caring man. I left him to chew on the question. Maybe he had an answer in his educated mind. Pastor, my reason asking is, I've been without my beloved Charles for over 30 years. 5 years ago, my youngest and last living child died. Over the years, most of my friends went to Jesus, and I helped bury them too. I think it's time for me to join them. My voice drifted around the room. A soft tap on the door silenced me. Isabel entered with a tray of rattling teacups and fresh baked biscuits in a little dish painted with roses. Pastor Frank rose from his seat and took the tray. He bent low and held it over my lap. Similar designs to the little dish adorned the teacup and saucer in my hands. It looks like James' biscuits. I've never in all my years enjoyed a boy's biscuits more than I do his. James was the local rags to riches boy. Miguel took the poor thing under his wing after his mama died at the rehabilitation center. A few months in his bakery, and James baked up a storm with his modern versions of Danish biscuits. I'd recognize his biscuits anywhere. They always found their way into gift packs I used to put together for birthdays and Christmas. Isabel beamed with delight. Of course, Mrs. Baxter. I have a standing order with him for biscuits every month. Did you hear about the Junior Baker Award he won the other day? He has made us so proud. I acknowledged the word with my hand in front of my overfull mouth. I did. He made us proud. To think he's only 14 years old. Isabel closed the door. Pastor Frank, I long to see my people again. God has been good to me all my life and carried me through the sadness and loneliness after they died, but I miss them. I would like to see them again. I dunked the biscuit in my tea. Soaked and sagging, I plopped it into my mouth before it dropped back into my teacup. Mrs. Baxter, I've never heard of anyone talk like this about death. Are you proposing an appointment to die? I pitied Pastor Frank as he spoke, picking his words. God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows your desire. Pastor Frank took up his cup and sipped his tea. That is what I thought. I enjoy my life. I'm active in our community. I'm not depressed or bored or ill or any of these things. I have a whole generation of new friends with whom I visit, and together we enjoy each other's company in a godly manner. But my life should end now. I feel it's time to make room for other people. My mind was made. Poor Pastor Frank could only listen. I understand, but you have what so many others don't. You should focus on that. You are healthy and loved, wise and experienced. Those are qualities and blessings to help and inspire all of us around you. Pastor Frank sipped his tea again. This sounds like a foolish notion. I'm not convinced this is a thing born from loneliness, but rather from terrible influences. Maybe a book you read, or a different denomination you visited? No, no, no. My teacup rattled in the saucer where I placed it on the small table next to my chair. Pastor Frank's cup followed. Nothing like that. His hands trembled when I took them in mine. Nobody influenced me but my own aching heart. My nights are lonely and every day is full. The world needs people like you. You'll die when it's time. God needs you here still. We need you here. His shoulders slumped. You are a beacon in our community. My mind is made up. My business is in order. I peeked into my teacup. Ultimately, I didn't need Pastor Frank's approval. This was something I wanted. I thought of making an appointment with God in prayer. If you could phone Chris Coffin to remove my body and finalize the last of the funeral arrangements, I would appreciate it. Chris typed up my funeral letter. He also arranged for my grave and tombstone to be ready. When I finished speaking, the room was quiet. Pastor Frank took up his cup and sipped the last tea before replacing it onto the small table. a little louder than necessary. Oh, my apologies. Have you decided on a date yet? I love Wednesdays, and Wednesday coming is good for me. Will 11:15 be a convenient time for you to come to my house? Pastor Frank was quiet. I had to chuckle on the inside. This sounded bizarre to this young man. Will you be able to do this for me? I will, but I don't agree with any of it. You'll dance in church Sunday, I'm sure of it. Maria, my housekeeper, walked teary-eyed from the house. It was just before 11. I felt a slight butterfly sensation in my stomach. How odd it was to experience that at my age, and about something which is otherwise supposed to be dreadful and dark. For a moment, doubt settled next to the butterflies. Maybe Pastor Frank was right. I would look like such a fool. Maybe I would dance in church that Sunday. No, this was what I wanted. No suicide or euthanasia. My time, my terms. Maria polished my chair at the window. I thought about wrapping my starry night quilt around my legs. To me, one's legs are private, and in my death I wanted them covered from prying eyes. The red rose bushes I nurtured from a cutting towered in front of the window. It was one of the last variants Charles created for the nursery. The grass was bright green and short. Through the window, whiffs of Miguel's fresh baked bread tickled my nose. I cancelled my weekly order with him and had to sidestep many questions not to reveal my intention. It was, after all, my story. 5 to 11. I walked to the chair by the window. The butterflies in my belly turned to knots. I was so excited, giggles threatened to burst forth. Susan, behave, I whispered to myself. I wondered how it would feel. Will it be painful? Will Charles be waiting for me? I looked forward to seeing my children again. How did it happen they never left me any grandchildren? The Bible promised a new body. Maybe these crooked old hands will pull straight and smooth again. Just one more minute. I sat down in my chair with my quilt around my legs. Folded hands in one's lap was such a proper way to die. With a deep breath, I prayed out loud. I am ready, Father. I closed my eyes and let my long breath out. The long arm on the clock creaked to announce 11 o'clock through the silence of the house. At 11:15, a loud knock on the front door echoed through the house. Pastor Frank stood in front of the door and waited. Nobody met him at the door. He turned the handle and the door clipped open. Mrs. Baxter? He called but received no answer. His footsteps sounded as irregular as his heartbeat while he strode down the passage. He reached the bright and sunny room at the back of the house where the smell of fresh mowed grass and roses greeted him. The chair was turned toward the window. Mrs. Baxter, Frank whispered. He walked in a wide circle around the chair and caught his breath. The familiar old face was shrouded in peace. He had never in all his years seen the old lady with closed eyes, except in prayer. A blush still glowed on her cheeks. For a while he stared at her hands where they lay in her lap. Numerous times those hands served tea. He leaned against the wall next to the window. You taught me something today about our Heavenly Father. Rest in peace, Mrs. Baxter. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket with one hand and unfolded a small leaflet of paper with his other hand. The buttons on the phone sang in the silence as he pressed them. Good morning, Chris. It is Pastor Frank Devenish speaking, Frank whispered. I'm at Mrs. Susan Baxter's house. She died a short while ago in her home, and she asked me to let you know. Frank's voice trailed away as if talking to himself. Chris Coffin's explosion of laughter burst through the earpiece. She did it! So she wasn't crazy! He laughed so much Frank held the earpiece away from his ear. She made me arrange her whole funeral. I humoured her. Chris burst into a new fit of laughter. I'm waiting here at the house for you. Thank you, Chris. Frank cut the laughter off and dropped the phone back in his pocket. Most of the blush had vanished from her cheeks. For the first time he looked around the room. She had prepared well for her meeting with God. Her house looked fit to entertain royalty. Frank slumped onto the step at the front door and pulled his cell phone from his pocket. This time he pressed one button. Isabel's voice sounded fresh and bright through the receiver. Isabel, Mrs. Baxter went as per appointment. Constable Sam stopped right behind Chris in front of the garden gate. Good morning, Pastor. What a weird situation. Were you with her? Constable Sam stared at Frank. No, Constable. She asked me to come here at 11:15 and to phone Chris to remove her body. A hand, please, Chris said. He turned when Frank and Sam rose to follow him into the house. Chris reached to remove the quilt. Chris, I think Mrs. Baxter wanted her legs to stay covered. She was a prim and proper woman. Chris let the blanket go and nodded his head. Frank waved goodbye to Chris as the hearse pulled into the lane. A furniture removal truck pulled into the parking space Chris just vacated. Good day, Frank called. Good afternoon. I'm looking for the house of Susan Baxter. The stout driver shuffled through papers clamped to a clipboard, which he balanced on his belly to confirm the name. Indeed, she's not available, Frank answered. Pastor Frank Devenish is the contact person, the driver answered. That would be me. Frank shook his head. Mrs. Baxter thought of everything. He grunted to himself. We are here to pack up the whole house and move it to Bertram Auctioneers. A small crowd gathered a week later in front of the empty shell of Susan Baxter's home. Bertram Foster stood on the porch with his hammer, rambling off the price which kept climbing with every wave of someone in the crowd. Constable Sam shuffled closer to Frank where he watched the auction. Do you have any idea how she died? We found no foul play. The coroner concluded natural causes. Sam scratched his head. Frank shook his head. She wanted to die. I don't think we'll find any sign to prove otherwise. The end. This was Appointment to Die, a short story, written by Anne-C. West and narrated by Anne-C. West. Copyright Anne-C. West. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, not stored in a retrieval system, stored in a database, and or published in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording or otherwise, without the prior written consent of the author, except brief quotes used in reviews with full disclosure. Reproduction of this work without permission from the author is an infringement of its copyright. This is a work of fiction. Any similarities to persons living or dead, business establishments, events, or locales are strictly coincidental and the author's imagination. Thank you for listening. Please comment and let me know if you enjoyed the story. Until next time, love from my house to yours.